Well, you might have caught up with the culmination of a legal battle that's been going on over these past few years. It was over the controversial practice of what has become known as Drag Queen Storytime in public libraries. Well-known Christian family advocate Lyle Shelton was sued by two drag queens for alleged vilification or hate speech. Well, last week, the judgment was delivered from the case that was before the courts. And there is good news that will encourage advocates of free speech. He has been vindicated. And Lyle Shelton, former head of the Australian Christian Lobby, current role National Director of the Family First Party. Lyle, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thanks very much, Neil. It's great to be with you.
Lyle, how you describe it, what does it mean that the court has found in your favour in this years-long case?
Yeah, it's been a 3-year legal battle, 3.5 years since I wrote a blog back in January of 2020 about a ratepayer-funded Drag Queen Storytime in the Brisbane City Council. And they were reading to little children, two drag queens, one presenting, a woman presenting as a man, the other a sexualised drag queen figure. And I said that drag queens were not for kids, they were dangerous role models for children, and I was sued. And so I guess to go to your question, the vindication, the judgment last week has meant that there's no penalty for me for doing that. But sadly, Neil, the process of 3 years and several $100,000 in legal fees, funded generously by supporters, means that the process has been the punishment. So yes, there's a vindication, but and we should celebrate that. And I'm thankful for my legal team; they did a great job. But freedom of speech is still very vulnerable in this country because you can still be dragged through a process like I've been through. And the laws that allow that are still on the books and they need to be changed.
Lots of different dimensions to what has happened over these past few years, but let's focus just for a few moments. I mean, there is a little bit of victory to be celebrated here, and I know that you'll be celebrating in a sober way because you know that there are challenging times ahead. But when you reflect on this judgment, this is a landmark, isn't it? This is a landmark that every advocate for free speech ought to be celebrating.
Well, yes. And I'm very thankful for the incredible legal team headed by John Steenhoff from the Human Rights Law Alliance in Canberra. I believe you had him on your program earlier in the week. He assembled a magnificent team of solicitors. And of course, we had support from Tony Morris, KC, and barrister Simon Fisher. Now, it's significant because Jeremy Gordon, the QCAT member who was presiding over the case, gave a very considered judgment in that he looked at the anti-discrimination law, these vilification laws that exist in Queensland. We have similar ones right around the country. And he was able to make a determination that I had not vilified these people based on their sexuality or gender identity, and that what I was saying about the potential dangers to children was in the public interest, and I should be free to say that. But as I say, our celebrations are muted in the sense that whilst we've got a great judgment and we've been vindicated, it doesn't mean that activists can't take other people to court in the same way and go through a 3-year process costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, because the laws, the anti-discrimination laws still exist. They're still very subjective. They're very vague. I guess the silver lining is they might think twice about pulling this sort of a stunt again, given Jeremy Gordon's decision last week.
Let me just ask you to reflect on the thought of digging in here for a moment and not bowing to the pressure that can come on from people like the drag queens, because they were saying because you had offended them, hurt them in the blog that you had written, that they wanted an apology, they wanted a retraction, and they wanted $10,000 each in damages. The value of digging in here. Some might have said, just apologise and maybe it'll all go away. What is the importance here, Lyle Shelton, of digging in when you have made an expression of your free speech and you've gone to defend the family. Your thoughts here about going the distance and not giving ground?
Yeah, I think it's really important that that all of us, really hold our ground here. We're in a mad moment in our culture where the LGBTIQA plus political movement is trying to normalise gender fluidity and early sexualisation of children through these Drag Queen Storytime events. They're happening all over the world, and of course they're happening all over Australia on a regular basis in public libraries. It's a deliberate strategy to indoctrinate children. So we have to be able to speak about this. It is harmful. It's harmful to tell a child that their gender is fluid, and this is what these drag queens do. It's harmful to present sexualised, hypersexualised role models, men dressing up as sexualised women and placing them in front of little children. So it was really important to dig in on this. 3 years ago when I was sued, I could have, made an apology in the Queensland Human Rights Commission as part of the mediation process, and maybe, might have got away with not much more than an apology and pulling my blog posts down. Later, they escalated it to a claim for those damages. Could have paid $20,000 and walked away. It would have been a lot better than the $200,000 to $300,000 that the case has cost. But what price do we put on free speech? And what price do we put on the ability to defend the innocence of little children? And I think that's the important thing. And that's why I'm so grateful to the 1,300 people and beyond who chipped in to support my legal defence. That's why I'm so thankful to the Human Rights Law Alliance, John Steenhoff and his team, because they enabled all of those people who donated, the legal advice, the people who prayed, that enabled us to dig in and to make a stand for free speech.
Lyle, let's reflect on the cost of victory here. As you say, several $100,000 in legal fees. And there'll be no doubt some listening to our conversation today thinking, oh yeah, I donated to that fund when there was a fundraiser going on to support these legal fees. Ordinarily, when you win a court battle, you're awarded costs. But how does this work in your case? Is there any opportunity for those who have contributed to the legal challenge to actually have any of that refunded?
I wish there were, Neil, because I know that many of the people who supported my legal defence are not people of great means. Most of the donations were small donations from mums and dads. There was a couple of large donations. I'm very thankful to every one of them. There was sacrifice involved. But the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal is what's called a no-cost jurisdiction. And so it's a court, but it's a very low level of court. And it's designed to allow activists like these two LGBTIQA plus drag queens to use very flawed legislation like the Queensland Anti-Discrimination Act and its vilification clauses. It was essentially a hate speech case. It allows these people, if they feel offended, hurt, feel like I might have ridiculed them or vilified them because of their gender, identity or sexuality, it allows them to use these processes. It allows it as a tool, as a stick to suppress freedom of speech. That's what they're designed to do. They're very flawed laws. When I was at Australian Christian Lobby, we were campaigning very hard for many, many years. Politicians are aware of these laws. They are aware that they are anti-free speech. It grieves me to this day that we haven't got people in our parliaments with the will and the courage to remedy these laws and to restore freedom of speech in this country, and that's what we've got to all really focus on. And I'm very committed to continuing the campaign and the fight so that no Australian ever has to be dragged through this again. And Neil, you'd be aware there's many other people like my friend Kirralie Smith being dragged through similar. Her legal nightmare is just beginning. Mine's just ended. Hers is just starting. She's probably got years ahead being dragged through the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, NCAT. So same idea. These laws are terrible. They must be remedied and fixed.
There are obviously lots of Christian positions. Take an ethical stand, a biblical stand, and you're highly likely these days to offend somebody. So when you've got your case and there is a victory there, and we can't actually just draw and reflect on that too much right now because that is a victory, but when you've got lots of different Christian positions that you can take on a whole lot of different ethical issues, and when that can be called hate speech, there's a challenge here on a lot of different levels, isn't there?
There's a huge challenge, Neil, and this is what we were warning about in the years leading up to the 2017 marriage plebiscite, that if you change the definition of marriage in law, you suddenly weaponise these very poorly constructed state-based anti-discrimination laws. And so suddenly, to talk about marriage between a man and a woman, that can be construed potentially as hate speech. And we saw Julian Porteous down in Tasmania, a Catholic Archbishop of Hobart, taken before a tribunal down there, or commission down there. Myself, I mentioned Kirraly. There's many others that are facing these sort of actions right now. John Steenhoff will tell you he's got a very full caseload, and we need to see these laws changed. Yes, we are rejoicing in the win, and it is a significant win, and we should celebrate it, because it's not often that the people pushing these political agendas have a setback like this.
Now, a victory for Lyle Shelton, but I know the victory is a lot broader than just you, Lyle. Victory for free speech, as we've been discussing, but here, in some sense, a victory for children. Perhaps there are some children who will be preserved from a lifelong medicalisation even, or the challenges that come with those who are affirming different ways that children think of their gender as being fluid. The victory for children, how significant is this in the judgment that's been handed down?
Oh, I think it's really significant, Neil, and thanks for raising that, because obviously that's the reason I wrote my blog. I was horrified when I went online and Googled the two drag queens that were reading to children in January 2020 in the Brisbane City Council Library. One of them on their Facebook page, and most kids are pretty tech savvy and know how to find Facebook on the internet. One of them had photographs displayed on her website of young girls young women who had had their breasts removed with the scar tissue or the scars across their chests. Johnny Valkyrie, that particular drag queen, a woman presenting as a man to these little children, was crowdfunding on her Facebook page so that she could get a double mastectomy. And sadly, she's gone ahead and done that. The other drag queen, Dwayne Hill, had on his Facebook page proudly displaying a photograph of himself with an X award from the adult entertainment industry. This is the industry that's behind pornography and the exploitation of young women. He also had a picture of a penis with a ring around it. Now, it wasn't a real one, but it was an image. This was all on his Facebook page. And now these were the two role models that the Brisbane City Council thought was a good idea to put in front of little children. That's why I said in my blog, they're dangerous role models for children. We have to be free to call this stuff out. And if I'd have lost my case, no other blogger or journalist or commentator would ever feel free to call out that which is behind these drag queens and the agenda that they carry into these drag queen story times, which is very harmful for little children.
How widespread do you think the practice remains of drag queen story time? Is it just a sort of, it's sporadic, it just sort of comes up every now and then? Is there some sort of organised effort for drag queens? Any ideas how far it is widespread? Your case was heard in Queensland. What's happening in the rest of Australia? Are you aware?
Yeah, look, I haven't researched it forensically, but we're hearing of these events all the time now, all over Australia. Of course, it's a global phenomenon in the Western world, and it's been accelerated since same-sex marriage came in. They're going after our children now. But recently in Victoria, for instance, just earlier this year, there was protests at a library in Melbourne. That was terrific. They managed to get it shut down. And then what did Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, do? And John Pizzuto, the Liberal leader, they welcomed drag queens into the Victorian Parliament House. In fact, one of the drag queens, not from the January case, but one of the others that I blogged about, he's got some filthy images on his Facebook page. They had him, Frock Hudson, in the Victorian Parliament reading to little children. You had Daniel Andrews making the way for this, John Pizzuto, the Liberal Party leader, saying what a great thing this was, and he was upset that he wasn't invited to go and meet the drag queen. So we've got politicians that are holding the gate open for these terrible role models, harmful role models to be put in front of little children and trying to normalise this. It's quite wicked, it's quite evil, and I'm very thankful for the result of my case, because we need to keep calling this out and keep bringing it to public attention, because most mum and dads would be quite angry about this.
When you say mum and dads, this is the other big dimension where people are in fact at risk, because it's one thing for you, an advocate for family, to speak out and be drawn before the courts. For others who might be involved in church leadership roles, and ones you mentioned in parachurch leadership like a Kirralie Smith, yes, they're targets, aren't they? But parents are not really off the hook here either. If a parent speaks out, there are all sorts of new laws that put parents at risk in some of these areas. Any thoughts here for parents and how they might be encouraged by the judgment that's been made about you, or just even that sober way of reflecting on parents not out of the woods yet either?
No, they're certainly not, Neil. We're seeing an avalanche, a tsunami of LGBTIQA plus, political indoctrination of children. It's in our schools. It's right through society. You mentioned, some of the new laws we've got, like the so-called gay conversion therapy laws, which make it illegal for a counsellor, a pastor, a doctor to try and encourage children not to go along to a gender clinic and have life-altering puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone surgery. In Victoria, of course, it's illegal for a parent to discourage their own child from going down the gender fluid path. A parent can go to jail for 10 years, and that was supported by the Liberal Party and the Labor Party in Victoria. And of course, these laws are about to hit New South Wales, where I'm living. So these are difficult times for parents, and that's why we've got to keep the public square open and the ability to speak and call this out, because I think the more the public know about it, whether they are people of faith or not, the average Australian isn't buying this. They want their kids to be left alone. They want parents to have the ability to shield their children from these things and not have it forced down their children's throat, particularly without their knowledge.
Lyle, any thoughts on whether there is a silver lining to your experience having been dragged through the courts? Now there is vindication, but I've heard of, and I'm not sure whether I've heard this in Australia. I'm just remembering now whether this is part of an international movement, something that might be sparking and growing into something more substantial. The thought that there is, in some places, pastor story time that's being introduced into some public libraries. I mean, I imagine that when you've got this sort of publicity that comes with the drag queens, that there might actually be a movement from the Christian church. Is there anything that you've been hearing about this? I'm not sure whether it's in Australia or whether I heard about this as something from the United States.
Yeah, no, look, I've been talking to some of my former colleagues at Australian Christian Lobby. They've been active, particularly I think in Tasmania, possibly South Australia, in introducing or at least putting forward the idea that there should be pastor story time in public libraries. I think it's a great idea. And you're right, Neil, there is a silver lining here. I mean, what we're talking about today is just so ridiculous, is so over the top, so offensive to mainstream people, that we can and should leverage the ridiculousness of it and say, well, okay, well, if LGBTIQA plus drag queens can get this sort of a platform, why can't someone go and read the Bible to little children just like Sunday school was? So yeah, these opportunities there, and I think we should take them. I think this is a time where we need to be bold, particularly Christians and leaders. This is a time for boldness, not for shrinking back. And I think if there's one good thing about my case and the win that we've had, thanks to the terrific legal team and the prayers and the finance, is that we've kept the space open. And I hope it emboldens others to speak as well. Please don't just leave it to people like me or Kirralie or the ACL. We've all got to now, go to the breach and raise our collective voices. And so there's too many of us to put in jail or to fine or take to court.
Well, it is a big win. It is good news for everyone who is an advocate for free speech. And Lyle Shelton has been vindicated. Lyle's a former head of the Australian Christian Lobby, but his current role is as National Director of Family First Party. And might be a seed or two sown here in this conversation, where there are public libraries in every town and community that will be listening into our conversation today. An opportunity there for pastor story time or for Christian story time. However you might see your role there might be a real opportunity to do something very significant in your public library and reading to children and helping to shape their good values. To connect with Lyle Shelton, he has a website, lyleshelton.com. And you'll be able to read Lyle's own thoughts on what's happened with this victory, lyleshelton.com. Lyle, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts with us on 2020 today.
Thanks, Neil. Really appreciate it.